It's Amy from Hagar, and we've got Catherine from Hagar as well. And we are thrilled to have Jasmine with us today on this conversation. Jasmine brings lived experience to the table. She's based in Canada, and we are so excited to learn from you, Jasmine. One thing that we are most excited about in this conversation is really understanding the trends and the themes and how human trafficking is shifting. In Hagar's work, over 30 years, we've been primarily based in Asia Pacific, and that narrative around human trafficking was so familiar for so many of us that it is an issue that happens over there in some other remote corner of the world. And we know that that is not true any longer. It is shifting and changing. And so we are thrilled to learn from you. So, with no further ado, why don't you start by telling us, Jasmine, a little bit more about yourself, your work, and what is driving you in this work these days?
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here with you folks as well and have this conversation. This is a conversation that comes up all the time. So I'm excited to be here and have this. We have this similar experience where people, even in North America, aren't really aware of human trafficking that happens here. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. Like you said, my name is Jasmine. My maiden name is Scott. My married name is De Fina. So if you find me online, it's Jasmine Scott De Fina. I am a survivor of domestic sex trafficking. I was trafficked 16 years ago. So dinosaur in that, but I've been doing anti-human trafficking work here in Canada and North America for the last 15 years since my exiting of my situation. And so I have both the lived experience being domestically sex trafficked. I have a bit of international sex trafficking experience as well as my work in the anti-human trafficking sector. So I'm happy to be here and be a part of this conversation with you. And I'm glad that we're here and able to talk about this and raise awareness on this really important issue.
Thank you. Jasmine, thanks for telling us a little bit about yourself and your experience and especially what you've been doing since as well. You've got a lot of experience. So what we do know is that you in North America work with law enforcement, lawyers, frontline organizations, and we're wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing as shifts, because human trafficking, we know, operates differently in North America today than it did 5, 10, 16 years ago. And so what have been like the biggest shifts that you've seen since the time that you had the experience to today?
Yeah, for sure. I could talk about that. I think it's important when we're talking about this to understand kind of the history of human trafficking in Canada and North America, because a lot of people are not aware and they separate the two. So, and I'm going to start with this because I think it's important to understand, who's being trafficked, who's being targeted to being trafficked in Canada as well. When we talk about the context. And so like human trafficking isn't a new issue here in North America. It actually started with the process of colonization. And it's important to highlight that because the most trafficked individuals in specifically Canada, I don't know exactly North America, but I know Canada, Indigenous women and girls make up only 5% of of our entire population, but they make up 40 to 60% of trafficked individuals. So we know that the number one people targeted for human trafficking in Canada are Indigenous women and girls. And so it's really important to understand that context of that historical trauma, the generational trauma, and how it all started. And it goes right back to colonization. Not something new here, but like you said, things are changing. So it's not necessarily kidnapping. We see that sometimes. It's not necessarily kidnapping anymore. It's mostly people that the individual knows. Even from my trafficking situation, it was mostly in strip clubs or in massage parlors or, establishments. And now we're seeing the shift to really being online, especially since COVID. So since, all of our young people, we're seeing them have access to being online. We're seeing the human trafficking itself move to online, even from a lot of times traffickers are not even meeting the individuals in person. Like I was working with someone who had never met their trafficker. All the transactions were online. So the customers were paying the trafficker directly through, cryptocurrency and the online, banks, and it was going directly to him, never even exchanging the hands of the trafficked person. She's working in a hotel. All her appointments are being set up by trafficker online, has no idea who's showing up at that door. And so we're seeing this shift from where a trafficker used to have to physically be present all the time, to a lot of it's happening online. And not even you don't even know who is trafficking you. So they're building relationship, finding these kids online, grooming them through online, apps, whether it's like a gaming app or Snapchat or these things, and then publishing them for sale on things like OnlyFans and these different websites. And then that's how we're seeing the shift here.
Mm-hmm. One quick follow-up to that, because I know that our viewers would have the question of, if there's not a person present, then how is it happening? How is this? Yeah.
Yeah, I get that question a lot, actually. And I think, it's really important to understand the trauma bond. And so traffickers, I always say everybody's at risk to being trafficked, unfortunately. Traffickers are really smart. They're really savvy. They know what they're looking for. All they need is one vulnerability to prey on, and they're going to prey on that vulnerability and exploit it. And so when you think about people today in general, just across the board, like, I don't know one person that doesn't, struggle with some sort of vulnerability. Like myself, for example, like I'm a mom. I look on Instagram and I'm like, oh my gosh, she makes sourdough bread on Sundays and like all the homemade stuff, and she works and she has the prettiest garden. I can't do that. And like, there's something there's something that we don't like. We feel like we missed the mark, or and traffickers are just looking for anything. And so we think about the young kids today and the pressures and the online and all the things that they're being faced with, the body shaming, the bullying, the cyber stuff. Traffickers are just looking for that one little vulnerability, and so they're preying on that, and so they're going after that. They're targeting that vulnerability, and so they're using the person's soft spot, their sore spot. They're using that to sink their hooks in them, and they do like the love bombing and the praising, and I'm here for you. I listen to you, and they listen to them better than anyone listens to them, and they pull all of these vulnerabilities out of them and their goals and their dreams, and they sell them back their story. They sell them back their dream. They sell them everything that they want to hear, and they act like they're that person. So they're building this trauma bond through the cycle of abuse. And eventually, the more times, the cycle repeats itself, the stronger this trauma bond is with this individual. And then they just have this, perception of this very close, deep bond with the trafficker, and they feel like the trafficker is breaking them down and telling them, you're good for nothing, nobody wants you, but I love you, I care about you, this is what love is. And kind of mentally, emotionally manipulating that, and kind of like beating it into them. And so they feel like there's no way out. They feel like there's no one that wants to help them. They feel like they're good for nothing but this. They feel like there's no resources, or the resources are for that person, not me, or and so they don't feel like they can reach out or they can leave. It's like the invisible chains. I actually saw a diagram online that really, I think, demonstrated it. Somebody sent it to me. It was like the greatest prison in your life is your own mind, and traffickers know that. And so they put these like invisible, chains, which is that trauma bond and that psychological abuse and manipulation, which oftentimes is even harder and stronger than the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do have one more follow-up question from this one, and it is related to vulnerability, because I think we've had some sense of what are vulnerabilities. Oh, growing up in poverty, or lack of access, foster care system, all these different things that have been part of the vulnerability conversation. Is that changing too? Have vulnerabilities shifted? Have they expanded? I just wanted to talk a little bit about that so that we know.
Yeah, I mean, statistically, we know that there are certain vulnerabilities that make people more at risk to being, preyed upon for trafficking. And like you said, it is like, being in the system, or poverties, or being precariously housed or unhoused, or, addiction, mental health. They're definitely, being a person of the BIPOC population in general, just being female puts you more at risk, statistically. But like I said, anybody can be at risk, and they can prey on any vulnerability. So I would say vulnerabilities, I mean, maybe they are shifting because, times are changing, things are different, and well, housing's more expensive nowadays. It's harder to access services. It's a hard time for everybody in the world right now. So
Mhm.
I think it pushes people into those categories that normally wouldn't be in those categories. But I think just in general, like even self-esteem, um, is something that traffickers prey upon.
Mhm.
And I think with the online, social media, that brings about self-esteem issues. So I think there definitely is a shift, but I think it's just pushing people into these categories more so with the changes in the economy and the world and how things are going.
Mhm.
Thank you. Um, I find that there's maybe a bit of a disconnect between what people might imagine trafficking looks like and probably how it actually happens in our communities. What misconceptions do you run into the most, and what actually does it look like in reality right now in 2026 US Canada?
Yeah. People always, when they think about human trafficking, it's kind of funny because I always get a reference to that Richard Gere, Julia Roberts Pretty Woman movie. And I'm like, that's not actually human trafficking. That's a sex trade worker and a customer. And then people always, come up with the movie, The Sound of Freedom. And
Mhm.
well, I think The Sound of Freedom definitely represents human trafficking in, worldwide. And it's not typically what we see here in Canada and North America. In Canada and North America, what we see is more like the numbers are showing us that it's more domestic sex trafficking. So it's local Canadian American girls being trafficked by local Canadian American, usually men, or sometimes they use women, which would be their bottom or their main girl, to exploit others. That's typically what we're seeing is like locals doing it to other locals. And we do still see statistically, and I struggle with stats because it's reported numbers. We know human trafficking is significantly underreported
Mhm.
for many reasons, and so I don't want to say boys are not trafficked, or gender fluid, or whatever, people are not being trafficked. It's just harder to report it. And then even when we think about domestic versus international, if I'm illegally living in a country, I'm probably not going to go to police with an issue, right? So um, I think that skews the stats a little bit too. But what we do see statistically is that it's mostly locals, and we are seeing the age decreasing. So the average age of a trafficking survivor in Canada, I know, is 12 to 14 years of age, and we're seeing younger and younger. Like we're having girls like 8, 9 years old coming in, that are being trafficked, and a lot of times it's familial. So
Mhm.
stepdad,
Mhm.
uncle, mom's boyfriend, friend, mom's being trafficked, that trafficker's trafficking them. And that's the big shift that we're seeing here in the work that I'm doing. I think a misconception that a lot of people have also is that it happens to them. Like those people, like they grew up in, like you said, in the system, or in impoverished situations, or that are struggle with addiction and mental health. And yes, of course, it does happen to people that struggle with those things as well. But for myself, for example, I didn't struggle with addiction. I mean, after doing therapy, I realized there's some mental health, like CPTSD from being trafficked. I grew up with some, childhood adversity. But I was a university student. I was, I had honors grades. I had a house that I had a beautiful home to live in. I had food. I had all of
Mhm.
those things met. For me, it was the disconnect from my culture, my community, being so far away from my family, going to university. Like I was studying pre med, and so those were the vulnerabilities that my trafficker preyed on for me. But when people look at me, they're like, oh, you were trafficked? Like, you don't look like what
Mhm.
we think a trafficking survivor would look like. And so I like to challenge that, because, we come in all shapes and sizes and different vulnerabilities. And it's not just like this one size fits all kind of category. And I think a lot of
Mm.
people think like there's a certain look like that a survivor should look like. And that's not always the case. And so I think a lot of times we think, well, like our kids are not at risk because, they're in sports and they have good parents and a nice home. And but traffickers are, like I said, they're savvy and they can prey on anyone with any vulnerability. And so I've seen kids that are like elite athletes, honor roll students, two parent home, and they end up being trafficked. So I think those are the misconceptions that I see a lot of times here.
I think that's such a good point to make too, Jasmine, of like, that we do all sort of have in our mind an idea, whether it's a stereotype or not, of what we think it looks like for a person who's been trafficked. Um, I'll also note that in the US, the average age of a survivor is also 12. It's dropped significantly in the most recent reportings, which is just hard. But I'm also curious. I think that part of the reason it's dropped is that the online piece, and that teens and preteens are so much easier to access now,
Mhm.
um, which could be part of the reason why a lot of the look and feel of people who are survivors doesn't match that stereotype of what we all think the over there or them of trafficking is. And because you said yourself that you've experienced people saying, oh, wow, you don't look like a trafficking survivor to me. You don't look like you would have been trafficked, which is sort of like, okay, guys. But how does that affect your experience, like your journey from traffic once you got out of the situation? And also, like, how does it affect the way that you are able to or do educate other people?
Yeah, no, that's so true. And even I had that stereotype in my head and that misconception.
Mm,
And so like I really don't try to place judgment on people, and they're like, oh well, you don't look like a trafficked or and it's those people who are trafficked. And I think like media feeds this, right? Like when we watch
mhm.
movies about trafficking or the stories you hear in the news. Um, and so even I had that misconception and thought, well, I could never be trafficked. Like I don't have those issues, or you know what I mean? And um, I was. And so I try to share my story for this reason, because I want people to understand. But even, and doing the work, and even when I was in the game and being trafficked, the women that people say are like those girls, they're someone's little girl, they're someone's little boy, they're someone's child, they're someone's sister, brother. And so I even that I like to try to break down that um, othering of people, because I know that I was given all the supports and the opportunity that I was given because of the way I present in this world. I'm not like, I know that I come from a place of privilege because I'm white presenting. I see this in the work that I do, in the resources available. I'm also part Indigenous. I don't present Indigenous. I work with a lot of Indigenous survivors and organizations, and the way funding is set up, the way systems work, the way police respond to situations, the way the legal system, the lawyers, the courts. Right, I've sat in court with so many survivors and helped them through reporting against their trafficker and whatnot, and I see the difference in interaction with my the women that I work with that are Black or Indigenous, people of color in general, people with different abilities or, disabilities or however you want to call it. I see the difference. And so I think it's so important that we break that stigma, and understand that, because we need to be able to support people as if they were, your own children, or, like, because they're someone's child. Right. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, why I share my story and what I try to educate on, that we need to be culturally aware, culturally sensitive. We need to watch our language and how when we're working with individuals, but also like how we're talking about the situation. I think that's really important. Language and cultural sensitivity and understanding, breaking down those stigmas for me are really important. And that's why I share my experience.
Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, and that is, I mean, I'm cognizant too that I've worked in anti-trafficking as an ally, not a survivor, but as an ally for 15 years. And so cognizant that the way I present in the world also is just so full of privilege, right? And how do we be aware and tread carefully and gently, with some humility in the world, and also know that with this has come such great responsibility to not be quiet, right, and to give voice. And anyways, thank you. I'm going to be mulling over that one for a little while for sure. Something that we're talking about a lot this month during Human Trafficking Awareness Month is technology. And this is a shift that we're seeing across Hagar's work in our programming in Asia Pacific. It's also what we're hearing here. I have 3 preteen and teenage daughters, and so that conversation is constant in our home, in the kids' schools, etc. How has that reality changed? The social media, online technology, how has it changed the landscape of like recruitment and exploitation in North America? And I think really, like, as a parent, and in this conversation this month, what do we need to be aware of? Like, what are the flags that we're looking for, as we're parenting kids, operating in this world?
Yeah, I get the question a lot when I present, especially at the police colleges. They always ask me, "What can we do to protect our children online?" And then, "When you figure it out, let me know," because I also have 2 teen daughters. So it's a worry of mine as well. And also I'm aware of the fact, like, statistically, my kids are also more at risk because of me being a survivor and being Indigenous and all the things. But I think what's really important is just understanding, number one, it can happen to anyone. So not having those blinders on that, like, oh, it'll never happen to my child. There's been certain things that I've had to deal with my children even. And I think, how did this happen to my kid? Because like I educate them on that, or I watch that, or I'm on top of it, but it just happens. And there's no judgment, and you shouldn't have shame around that. It just happens to anyone, right? And I felt like even from my mom, she got attacked a lot. I did a W-5 when I got out of my court case. I didn't even think to tell my poor mom. And she was working in a pharmacy, and they all came in the small town where I'm from, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, how did you let your kid get trafficked?" And I think as a society, we need to stop that. My mom didn't allow it. She had no idea it was happening. She tried so hard when she found out, or had an inkling as a mom. But so like the judgment, right? Number one, and of ourselves, right? Like we need to just understand it can happen to anyone. There's no judgment. There's no shame. It's just, if you ride a bicycle, there's a chance that you could fall down and scrape your knee. It's as simple as that. If your kid has access to online, if your kid has access to the world, which they all do, if they walk outside, it's just a risk, number one. So no judgment, no shame, and we shouldn't hold other people to that or ourselves. And then understanding that when we're giving our kids access to, or being forced to give our kids access to these, phones and iPads and gaming systems, because even some parents tried so hard to protect our kids from it, but the schools, like with COVID shutdowns, we had no choice. And now really everybody's online. We're moving to all this digital online stuff. So it just is what it is. And we have to start educating ourselves and our kids on, how do we stay safe online? So teaching our kids, like, not to share personal information, not to add strangers. And kids are kids. They don't listen. I have 2 of them, so we have to constantly, as parents, be checking. And it's a lot. It's a lot of work. It adds something to our plates that, I don't have time to do. It's so stressful, but we have to learn to do that. Like, going through our kids' messages, going through their photos, going through their emails, going through their Snapchats. If you're allowing them to have Snapchat, having it on your phone so you can monitor it. So there's some of the safeguards that we can do, but really we have to educate the kids to, this is what's happening online and this is how you can protect yourself. And, there's a lot of different groups that have online like digital literacy courses for parents, which I find so helpful. Like one that I took was from a group called Defend Dignity. They're online on Instagram, and they have these workshops, online webinars all the time about digital literacy for parents and how trafficking happens online. I know like our government has it on our websites, and I think you also have through Polaris Group in America. They have these digital literacy things, which is so helpful. And I'm constantly, as a mom, mostly, but also working in the sector, going through these literacy groups and learning myself, because things change all the time. There's new apps every single day. We can't keep up with all the different apps, but I think really teaching them like stranger danger, but online. So like not sharing personal, not posting photos with your address or license plates or, identifiers, like even trees, right? Like there's something so simple, a tree when you're on vacation and posting like a type of tree, because people can pinpoint these things. There's identifications to images, right? Like the photos have like this photo was taken here. Like my iPhone tells me like, oh, you were in the Dominican Republic when you took this photo. And they can access these things. Like some of them are so tech savvy, right? And so you think about like the fraud that's happening online with like, getting emails from like a hotel that you booked on a WhatsApp message. Like, so traffickers are doing similar things. So we need to be able to teach our kids about these things, right? So your footprint online, and things like that, and then what the language looks like, right? So it's usually asking questions about you, like your friends know about you. So even if it's like, let's say Catherine's messaging me, I know Catherine. Like, why would Catherine ask me how my dog's doing if she knew that my dog passed away? You know what I mean? So picking up on like, your friends know about you. They're not going to ask about you. If your friend wants to ask you a question, they can ask you face to face. Like, just being really careful about those online conversations, because people can pose as your friend. They can take their photos, they can take their accounts, they can, message, and traffickers do these things. So just really being careful with what you're sharing online, even your photos. Like, unfortunately, it's come to a world where we can't even share like our faces online, because they can use it for so many different things, and they can post on these websites and post ads for them, and it's not even our kid. And so it's really, that online literacy is really important. And if they're having access, they need to understand that these are the things that are happening out there.
Quick follow-up there, Jasmine. Have you run into yet anything around AI and how that's affecting trafficking?
So I haven't personally, but I was teaching on a police course, and another instructor was sharing on how even police have to change the way they're policing now, because like evidence, for example, they're able, like they actually posted it on the screen, and it was like, which one is AI? And nobody could identify. And one of them had a gun in a drawer, and like the condoms from, like, it was a room of someone being trafficked, and one of them had a gun and the condoms and the money in a drawer, and the other one didn't have anything in the drawer. And they're trying to show them like, look at how good AI is. Like, you can't tell the difference. And so it is happening. And officers are training on it and discussing it. But I have not personally seen that. But what I do see a lot of is traffickers taking images and posting them. So not necessarily changing the image or AI, editing, but like just taking someone's image from their Instagram and posting it to sex ads, and then using it, saying, I'm going to show this to your parents, I'm going to show this to your teacher, your whomever, right? Your job. Now you need to do what I'm asking you to do. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But it does happen. I know it is. So.
Yeah. Whole new world ahead of us, hey? Maybe working through. Yeah.
That is, I think it'll be interesting in the next coming years as AI moves so quickly to see how we as a world respond to it, but also how traffickers and how the world of trafficking shifts because of it. And with the shifts and things, what you spoke a little bit about, like warning signs that you can look out for, but also like as humans, and like parents, teachers, the people who sometimes are the ones who report someone who might be being trafficked, or might be being abused in some way, what are those warning signs or like behavioral shifts that people could be looking for? Like, there could be signs or symptoms, um, as we have like parents, teachers, people who work with kids or with young adults. Like, what are those things that if they see it, they should say something?
Yeah, I love how you said behavioral shifts. It's so important. Um, it's really important to know the individual, because you need to look for the baseline behavioral shifts. So, like if you Google signs that somebody's being trafficked, you're going to come across like the most reported ones. Almost all of our websites have it. It's the same ones, and one of the big ones is like having an additional cell phone might
Mhm.
be a sign. But for some people, it might be that their phone was taken away, right? So maybe they had a phone, but traffickers now holding the phone and controlling the phone. It could be maybe two phone numbers, but they might not necessarily have a secondary phone. Another one that we always talk about is dressing more sexualized. I don't know about you, but the Kardashian era, or maybe I'm like aging myself, but the era that we're in today, the Swift, I don't know, I'm like Swifty, I don't know what the kids are into these days, but um,
It's like the K-pop demon hunters where they wear
yeah,
like the little midriff
they
shirts.
wear like nothing,
Yeah.
and whatever, no judgment. But I'm constantly fighting my teenagers, like put some clothes on. We live in Canada. It's -13. Like put a jacket, cover your midriff. You know, um, and so my kid dressing like that for me is not an indicator that she's being trafficked because
Hmm.
God love her, she's always like that. Dancer. I'm a bit of dance mom. Now for me, if my little dancer who's always if their midriff showing out starts covering up and wearing turtlenecks and like sweaters, especially like weather, like if it's the summertime and she's covering, that is a big red flag to me. What are you covering? Are there
Hmm.
scars? Is there bruising? And it's not necessarily trafficking. It could be that she's hiding an eating disorder. It could be that she's hiding self-harm. It could be, but it's a significant baseline behavior change that as a mom, I need to be aware of and I need to explore a little bit more. What's going on here? And a lot of parents are like, oh my gosh, my kid's being trafficked. It's not necessarily being trafficked, but there is something that needs attention here. Decline in grades. You're not going to see an increase in grades typically. So it would probably be a decline in grades. I think we can across the board say that might be one. So for me, when I was being trafficked, my trafficker, I think I was like his backup plan for retirement. I was in pre-med and I was, pretty good with my grades. He used to like actually beat me if my grades weren't good. So in the beginning, my grades stayed, but eventually there's only so much a human can take. And so when you're working 24/7, being physically beat, mentally, emotionally, all these things, malnourished, lack of sleep, living off Red Bull at the time because I had to go to school, go to work, my grades decreased. Like I ended up being on academic probation. I ended up having to take some time off from school forcefully. And then I was allowed to come back. But that was a big indicator. Unfortunately, nobody said, like, what's going on, right? Nobody dug deeper. They're just like, you're in trouble, get out. So hopefully now schools, I mean, like I said, it's a little bit dated. I was like 2007 or 8. I don't look young, it's Botox. um, but it's still very relevant, right? So if we see a decline in grades, and again, for parents, like it's not necessarily like your kids being trafficked because their grades are slipping, but something's going on, right? Whether it's that they're not understanding or that, something's going on mentally or, right, something. Now, if we're seeing multiple of these things, so, kid is, you know, not showing up to school, grades are declining, they're changing the way they're dressing, whether they're covering up or dressing more sexualized. There's another phone, maybe there's a go bag packed, like a bag with like maybe like working things, like an extra pair of clothing. Maybe it's like sexualized clothing, like to go to work with, or maybe it's like with a handkerchief in the bag, condoms. Like you're seeing like multiple of these things. That's big indicator that the kid is being trafficked. That the individual is, if they're older than 18 and has this going on, maybe they're engaging in the sex trade, but maybe they're being trafficked. But if they're underage, that's a child that's being exploited. It's illegal. They can't consent to sex trade, so they're being trafficked. So those are some indicators, and definitely like things like looking down, not looking you in the eye, not making eye contact, being more secretive, having older friends or an older boyfriend or girlfriend are really big indicators. There's usually a big age gap. My trafficker was 7 or 8 years older than me. Typically we see that like 6, 7, 8, 10 plus years. Not always. Sometimes they're the same age, but a lot of times we do see that big age gap. What are some of the really big ones that I'm seeing nowadays? Like withdrawing from friends and family is a big one, because trafficker wants to isolate you. They want to be everything to you. And so that, don't talk to them. Don't tell your parents. No one's going to understand our relationship. And this is the kind of thing they're telling the person that they're trafficking or grooming into being trafficked. And so withdrawal is a really big one. Eventually, when they do kind of pull them away, and they're trafficking them, they might not know their whereabouts. So I remember, when I was working in different areas, I knew that I was in like Miami, but actually I wasn't even in Miami. I was in Fort Lauderdale. I thought I was in Miami, so things like that. Like if you're going on vacation, like you booked a hotel in Fort Lauderdale, you understand that it's not Miami. But when you're being trafficked and someone booked the hotel for you, you have you're in a new area, you have no idea, you're young. These are big indicators. They don't really know the area. Maybe they don't have their ID on them. Traffickers oftentimes hold on to the physical ID. Anytime my trafficker traveled with me, he would withhold my passports. Having someone speak for them. So not allowed to speak, changing the way they speak, right? Sometimes they get a little, you get a lot more angry. You get, we call them prickly porcupines with a soft underbelly. We're a little spicy when we're being trafficked, understandably. It's typical expected responses of trauma. And you're groomed to think that the world is the enemy. They're either money or the enemy, and the trafficker is your only ally. And so, you're not overly friendly and kind and bubbly and smiley. So changes like that would be, maybe if they're getting really aggressive or angry with you, you ask a question just like, how was your day? And they start screaming and yelling at you, that's an indicator that something's going on. Or if they're like, they don't want to talk to you. I would say that. And then, substance use, we're seeing a lot of traffickers getting individuals hooked onto substances nowadays. Or preying on people that have substance abuse struggles. And so I think that's another big indicator nowadays. In 15 years of working in the sector here in North America, I've only worked with one individual that didn't struggle with substance abuse issues. So that's a really big thing that we're facing here.
I would like to switch gears and focus a bit more on what comes afterwards. How do we support individuals? We'll talk more, in a few minutes about what can ordinary people like all of us do. If we're suspecting this, how can we create a more safe and free community in which we live? But I would like to just hear from you about meaningful recovery and what does that look like? I would love to hear from you what that looked like for you, how you've gotten to this point where you are today, so like fearlessly defending others, and what support systems are essential for survivors, and how we can be like meaningfully building those where we are.
Yeah, recovery is a long road. Getting out is really, really difficult. I never, ever thought that I would get out of my situation. I just had kind of succumbed to this is my reality. It is what it is. I got myself into this situation is what I thought. I didn't realize that I was, preyed upon, lured, groomed, conditioned, manipulated, coerced. I really thought like I chose this and this is my fault and I'm good for nothing, and nobody will ever love me or care about me. And the traffickers and the customers and the other people in the industry that are exploiting you. They're really like kind of hammering that into you. And so you kind of give up hope and you feel like there's no way out. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't make it out, right? And so for those of us who do, there's a lot of survival guilt on top of that, getting out. So, to leave, it has to come down to, a really massive turning point. Sometimes gives women like the courage, the ability, the opportunity to leave. And when I think about turning points, like really big ones that a lot of survivors have identified are sometimes getting pregnant, sometimes an overdose, sometimes some time spent in jail, sometimes getting connected to your culture or religion, connecting with God, reconnecting with family or loved ones. Those might be, and for a lot of people, those are some things that, help them to see kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel and kind of be able to get out. But a lot of times, it's a lot more complex than that. And so for me, I didn't think I would ever get out. I'd always hoped and prayed that another one of the girls would snitch and call the cops, and I would just be like free, but like still loyal, but like free. Because it's really like the whole game has like this culture of like loyalty and not snitching and so I didn't ever want to be the one that called the police or whatever, but I was always hoping that the police would intervene or that somebody, like a bystander, would see something. Like I've been punched in the head in shopping malls and people just kept eating their lunches or going about shopping. Like nobody ever stopped. I went through customs from Cuba to Canada with my head, like my face was so mangled, I didn't even have eyeballs, and they never said a word. And he spoke for me and he had my passport and nobody said anything. And I remember just thinking like, oh my goodness, like nobody cares. Like he's right, nobody cares. And so I think like for me, I'm so loud when I see stuff. I always like want to report it or intervene. I don't recommend everybody intervenes if they see something happening, but like call the police. I like get a photo, get a video, call the police, get the time, get the date, get what she's wearing, get what he's wearing, try to get as much information as you can, report it. Because sometimes we're just like sitting there wishing and praying that someone would report it. But unfortunately that didn't happen for me until I got pregnant for my traffickers, a child, and my brother witnessed him hit me in the head. And so my brother went to the police. So my family had tried to go to the police. And the police kept saying, unless she's willing, there's nothing, and cooperative, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do. I think we need to change policing, where we can have victimless cases where you can, don't have to go in the courts and stand in front of your trafficker and see what happened. Like, it'd be so amazing if we could do that. Like, we're so advanced in so many other ways. Like, we should be there. So that's one thing that I always advocate for. But, so it took my brother finally witnessing something. And then my trafficker had threatened my brother. He said, I'm going to kill you if you don't leave. So it took that for my brother to be able to get police to listen to him. And even then, the first officer he spoke to said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing I can do. And then another officer that he saw him in the parking lot crying and told him where to go to get help. And so it was my brother reporting and a police officer knocking on my door and basically forcing me to go into the station. And I fought for 18 months. I was not giving a statement. I was not pregnant with this kid. I was so scared. I wasn't going to get mat leave. I was in my last year of university. I didn't know if there was a way out of this. And I was so scared that it was her dad and, my daughter. And so it took me 18 months to finally trust that officer, that he cared about me, my daughter, our well-being versus just climbing the corporate ladder and policing. And, it took him that long to build that relationship, that rapport. And so I think for me, when people ask, how can I help? I say, never give up. Never, ever, ever give up. Whether it's 18 months, 16 years, never give up. There are women that tell me where to go and how to get there and want to kick me to it. And I always message them on Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving or Eid or whatever holidays. And I'm just any opportunity I can, hi, happy birthday, happy this, whatever, just checking in. And they're take a hike, in some other language. And I'm no problem. Here, I'm here. I don't change my phone number for a reason. A lot of awful people have my phone number, but a lot of women have my phone number and I want them to have it. I keep my channels open, just so that they know, like, I'm not judging you, I'm not intervening, but I'm here. I'm here, no judgment, and I care, and that's it. And for me, that's how that officer showed me. Um, he checked in, like, how's the baby? How's the pregnancy? You need anything for the kid? And then eventually my walls came down.
Mm.
That prickly porcupine kind of rolled over and showed the soft underbelly, but it takes a lot of time because when you get out, right, you now like housing, biggest issue. Like, where are we going? There's nowhere. Like, I now run a safe house for survivors of human trafficking. It's called Safe Hope Home. We're the only survivor-led organization in Canada. There's, like, I'm gonna say maybe, if we're lucky, 10 human trafficking designated homes in Canada.
Mm.
Not one of them is emergency shelter. I'm trying to open an emergency shelter. It is such a feat. There's no funding. There's, like, just so many things. It's so complex. So there's VAW shelters, which is not ideal, violence against women shelters, because the issues are so different, right? There's just so many differences between the issues. And then a lot of people don't want to go to a program or a home. Like, maybe you have children, so a lot of women have children. You can't bring your kids. So where are your kids going? A lot of times what's happening is the kids are being taken away either by children's aid, or the father, who's a lot of times the abuser, gets the kids, or the parents of the abuser, or even the woman's parents, who kind of played a role in failing her, and so you're being penalized for trying to get out.
Mm-hmm.
You lose your kids. So a lot of women stay for that. Or, like, even, like, especially with the addiction piece, right? Like, to go away and get treatment for addiction, and even the funding, like, it takes more than 30 days. I couldn't kick my coffee addiction in 30 days, let alone, like, and so coming out of trafficking, you're dealing with the adverse childhood experiences and trauma that led you to being, I hate the word vulnerable, but, like, at risk to being trafficked or preyed upon to being trafficked. Plus now the complex post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma you're dealing with of being trafficked and of being in the sex trade, which is essentially being sexually assaulted multiple times daily by unknown perpetrators. Like, working in the sex trade is not having respectful, intimate relations with a kind, respectful individual. It's a person in power and control and dominance coming in and paying to use and abuse you in any which way he so pleases with no consequence, right? And so dealing with that, then now you've been in the game, you've gone through all that, you have all this complex trauma, you're used to the rules and the norms and the culture of the game, and now you're being plopped into, the square world, into society, and told, okay, take care. And you have a gap in your resume. Where are you going to work? You have no access to education because it's so expensive, and you can't afford a roof over your head, so you're living in a shelter. The housing wait list is years long. So you leave and you have all these complexities to deal with: the mental health, the trauma, the physical. A lot of times you're leading with physical injuries. Like, I have damage to my occipital nerve and my eye, and I have nerve damage on my body. And I have women that, like, had broken backs and broken legs and, like, significant physical injury, blind, like, face burns, cuts, scars, tattoos all over their faces. So it's mental, physical, emotional, all these things they're coming out with, and there's just no resources for it. And we still have a lot of stigma and judgment in society. And so that's what coming out looks like and recovery looks like. And so, it is a long, long, long road. And for me, like I said, I know because of my privilege, I received supports. And my biggest support was my peer mentor, Bridget Perrier, and Natasha Fowle. They're my peer mentors. And they kind of taught me how to use the system and to navigate it, and how to get out. And I had to go on social assistance. I had to move to a basement apartment from my, like, 5,000 square foot beautiful home in the suburbs, and I had to take a bus instead of driving my Mercedes G-Wagon. And it was a lot of humbling experiences. I went from making like $30,000 to $50,000 a month to living off of 1,000. And so it was a lot, but I had family that helped me. And then, I, ended up meeting my husband through my church, and his family, I lived with them. They took me in, and kind of, that was how I was able to get out. Recovery is really, it's a long, long road. And I didn't get trauma therapy until maybe 5 or 6 years out, because I didn't trust any therapists. And so it took me a long time to find one that I trusted. And so now I work with Dr. Jackie Linder. She's also like an international educator and advocate. And she works a lot. She deals a lot with police and perpetrators and survivors. And she's renowned for her work in the neurobiology of trauma. And so I've been working with her for, 8 years now or so. And, it's still a long road. But ultimately, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear it, I credit my recovery and where I'm at to God. People always want it, especially my government friends want to take that out, but I'm sorry, I can't. For me, that's what got me through, and has healed me. But it's still a struggle. There's still a struggle. I have a daughter from a trafficking situation, and she's a teenager now, and so we have to work through that piece as well. And that's what a lot of survivors are facing. And unfortunately, a lot of them don't have as much support or access to support or resources like I do. Yeah.
That's
Wow.
such good information. A lot. I mean, it's a lot. I'm so thankful that you're sharing it all with us, and good information for everybody to know. I love the pieces that you were sharing about, like, what it could look like, what you can do. I think you said, don't give up was like the biggest piece of it. It can look like the person not wanting to talk to you for months and months and years. And that's important for everybody to know, because I think one of the biggest things that for our viewers and the people that we interact with and people that I end up talking to, people always ask, like, what do you do if you suspect somebody's being trafficked? Like you said, don't maybe intervene, but call the police, and tell them and get all of the details. That's an important piece, is get as many details as you can. But one of the other pieces that I think is, everybody wants to make a difference. So if they do suspect something's wrong, what's one thing that they can do? And if there is something that you can think of, what's something that don't do? Like, what's something that could inadvertently cause harm, and what to do sort of instead of that?
Yeah. So for me, I think the biggest thing, like I said, is if you witness something, get as many details as you can, record it and report it. I would never intervene unless you are law enforcement, because it can put you or your loved ones at risk. And I think, like, if people witness something and they see, a girl alone, or a person that they think is being trafficked alone, it never hurts to, if you're an agency that can support, just, kind of give them a phone number or a business card, or ask them if they're okay, or give them a gift card to like a coffee shop or whatever. Like, if you're like at I want to say Tim Hortons, but I don't know, those, like, Starbucks. If you're at a Starbucks and you see someone sitting there, just possible, like, just like a little act of kindness just shows that, like, it plants a seed that they're not alone, they're not unseen, they're not uncared for.
Mm.
Hotel staff should be reporting it. Another big thing that I tell people is stop buying sex. Stop watching porn. Don't buy into the industry that is exploiting individuals. It is an exploitive industry. Nobody grows up saying, I want to do this for a living when they're a little kid. Like, they want to be, now, we used to want to be princesses. Now we want to be, influencers, or, Kardashians. But, back in the day, or Swifties, but back in the day, like, we want to be princesses, we want to be doctors, we want to be lawyers. Like, no one's saying, like, when I grow up, like, I want to work in this industry. Like, it's not a nice industry to work in. And so I think the more we support it, the more we're supporting the exploitation of vulnerable people. And speaking out is really, really important. And then supporting these organizations, right? Like, you're like Hagar, like Safe Home, like, all the groups, the not-for-profits that are doing the work in your communities, supporting it. maybe, and I hope it's never your child or loved one, but you know, you never know. And a lot of people think, you know, I'll give to like the Alzheimer's Society or the sick kids or whatever, which is great. But it's, you know, we need a lot more financial supports and advocacy for laws as well. Shut down the sex industry.
Jasmine, thank you so much for just sharing so like authentically and transparently about your story. And this has been so informative and so helpful. We will, yeah, I think this will make a difference. So thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.